I'm Bob Brill. He's Erik Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill Fantasy Football Podcast, and now a video cast as well. Here we are in our second season, and you can hear the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, radio.com, Libsyn, wherever you get your podcasts. And now you can also see the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel. Or, easiest way to do it, find the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. Just go to the website, kramerandbrill.com. We'll have everything for you. That is the easiest way. Well, my co-host, of course, is former Bears and Lions quarterback Erik Kramer. And wow, what a way to kick off the NFL fantasy season. Anything but a fantasy. In fact, we wish it was all a dream. Erik, the pandemic's really thrown a wrench into what was going to be a changing NFL season anyway. So what do your sources tell us about how the NFL players are going to handle all this?
Well, I think the word that I got that everybody is adapting to now in the NFL is adaptable. So all the teams right now are doing just that. They're all having training camp at their own facilities, which actually the Bears were going to do anyway prior to the pandemic happening. And I think as the season goes on, there's things that crop up, like what we've seen so far in the other professional leagues where, let's say, a Saturday before a Sunday game on the COVID testing, there's a rash of positives. So I posed this question to the guy at the Bears, and he said, well, we actually did have that. Remember when Matthew Stafford got a false positive? Well, so did about half the Bears team on a Saturday night. So what would have been before, say, a Sunday game in the regular season, only it turned out to be false positive. So reacting under the terms of thinking it was an actual positive for many players, they had to make some adjustments to the point where they had to switch practice they canceled practice for Sunday and then they scheduled it for come back Monday or Tuesday. So this guy that I know with the Bears said, okay, let's say this is the regular season. Not only are we going to have to be adaptable, but the television networks are going to have to be too. So let's say we had a noon game. So in Chicago, they're on Central Time. Games are either at noon or 3 p.m. If we had a noon game and all of a sudden we get all these false positives, the networks are going to have to be able to potentially push it back to 3 p.m. And then, or say they reschedule it for another day and then it comes back as false positives. Well, they can take that 3 p.m. or noon game and switch it to possibly 3 p.m. The other thing that, they're not going to have to deal with, at least in the beginning of the season, is fans. So that also would be, should they have started with fans and say they're going to sell out all these stadiums to reschedule games, they're going to have to take that in consideration, which now, like Major League Baseball and the NBA, played in front of no fans, they won't have that consideration.
Well, we have another issue, just as important situation to deal with. The NFL, like the other leagues, is dealing with the social justice issue of the day, and that speaks volumes for the players. As we know, the Black Lives Matter movement, which really kicked into high gear after the George Floyd murder, has been front and center for most of the major sports. The NBA and the NFL sport a majority of black players who have taken this issue to heart. But even baseball, which has a very low percentage of African-American players, has been heavily involved. The issue was recognized, back in your playing days too, but nothing like today, right?
No, nothing like today. In fact, this is a historical time. It's never before, if you think about the history of race relations in this country, it's been deplorable. And yet it's never been ever addressed like this. And so I think this is, because of that, I think and I'm speaking, I guess, I hope not at a turn because I'm white and this is not a situation that has negatively impacted me throughout my life. So I think the black community as a whole, not just by any particular professional sports league, but just as a community in general across the country, and for the history of black people in America, in this country, I think that's why, the moment is right now. And I think a lot of people around the country, within the black community, see that as this is a very important moment to not lose the opportunity to keep this the national consciousness very wrapped around this central issue. And so I think it's bound to come up. It has to come up in the NFL season. And I think the players are going to, seize any opportunity they have to make use of that situation. And I think that the commissioner and the league and all of the teams combined are going to have to be ready to deal with that. And it sounds like they're making preparations. We'll just see how that all plays out once something actually does come to the forefront.
Well, let's move right into the fantasy season. There's been a lot of major changes. Tom Brady's in Tampa Bay, joined by Leonard Fournette. Cam Newton has replaced Brady in New England. The Raiders move to Las Vegas. Joe Burrow takes over the reins for Andy Dalton in Cincinnati. Big Ben is healthy again and ready to test the elbow to cut his season short in Pittsburgh. Adrian Peterson's in Detroit. Keenan Allen gets an $80 million contract. Josh Rosen's on Tampa Bay's practice squad. The Steelers have waived quarterback Duck Hodges and Paxton Lynch, then re-signed Joshua Dobbs, who they traded a few years ago, and then kept wide receiver Ryan Switzer. Third-round pick of the Raiders, Lynn Bowden Jr., didn't even make it to September. The Raiders quickly admitting a mistake by sending him to the Dolphins. Mitch Trubisky, one of your favorite guys, is still in Chicago. Joe Flacco's a Jet. Hakeem Butler, cut. Mohamed Sanu and Lamar Miller were cut by the Patriots. Phillip Rivers is a Colt. Frank Gore is a Jet, and pushing a lackluster Le'Veon Bell. And Patrick Mahomes is still in Kansas City, and the Eagles signed 41-year-old quarterback Josh McCown to the practice squad, proving once again there's still hope for Erik Kramer to come back to the NFL. Old guys rule, dude.
Well, I guess in McCown's case they do, but not in my case, because you have to pass a physical, or at least I would, and that's not going to happen. But yeah, at 55, no, I'm done. But I think, you mentioned Mitchell Trubisky, and, last year I thought the Bears made a mistake in not letting Chase Daniel play longer into the season once Trubisky hurt his shoulder. And it's almost like they rushed him back in, and for what? I don't get it. And I think Trubisky is going to be the benefactor this year of the unfortunate circumstances of the COVID pandemic, in that it forced every NFL team to have no offseason. And with no offseason on field and in the meeting room, that's why I think Nick Foles lost his quarterback competition, because he didn't get the chance to show what he can do throughout a full offseason, then through training camp, which got abbreviated, and then with no preseason games. I think there was no way but Trubisky win the outcome of this quarterback competition. Myself, I was involved in one back in my first year with the Bears was 94, in which I got hurt and then Steve Walsh came in and led our team to the playoffs. So the following year in 95, leading up to that year, Dave Wansack came to us and said, hey, we're going to make this a full-out quarterback competition, and I'm not going to decide this until the very end. And he didn't. And it turned out that whole off season and during training camp, it forced me, not that I wouldn't have anyway, but it forced me to, I guess, be evaluated daily, and I was. And the result of it was we had offensively had a great season, and I was, I guess, as you look back, very productive in terms of breaking several Bears passing records. And I think missing that, I think, is going to, I'd say, hurt Trubisky in the long run, because I think in the short run, had he been able to compete along with Foles, who knows who would have won that competition to start the season.
I want to point out, too, that you still hold those Bears passing records.
Well, thankfully, I mean, it's for whatever reason that is, I don't know. But at least you're right. Maybe it gives, they're going to get broken at some point. But I guess in a way, for me, it's been nice to hold on to something there in Chicago for several years. Yeah.
Well, Eric's going to take a look at the 10 fantasy impact breakout players that he expects to have those breakout years this year. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I think starting with the overall number one pick this year in Joe Burrow out of LSU, going to the Bengals, who had have had kind of a horrible, I'd say, decade plus, especially last year. And now he comes in, and in my opinion, in 20 years, I don't think I've seen a more NFL ready. I know that's kind of a quote that people use with players coming out of college, but as a quarterback, I haven't seen one, at least in 20 years, come out that looks as good as Joe Burrow potentially could be this year. I think he'll avoid a lot of the NFL rookie mistakes that a lot of quarterbacks fall into. And he's got plenty of weapons around him, starting with A.J. Green and Joe Mixon, who just signed a new deal. And I think that's, maybe not to start the year, but at least halfway and possibly 2/3 into the season, Joe Burrow could look like maybe a top-end quarterback, at least wait maybe to finish the year and then moving ahead on into next year. Matthew Stafford, I think, also here with the Lions, last year before his season got cut short due to injury, he was on pace to be one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks statistically in the NFL. And I think that's only going to get stronger this year. You and I both we're high on T.J. Hawkinson coming out of Iowa, and as a tight end. So now he's healthy. You've got a strong running game combined with Kerryon Johnson and then Swift out of Georgia, and Galladay's proven himself to be a very fast and potent weapon on the outside. So I think Stafford is going to jump in and I think elevate his game. I hate to say it this year because they do start out with the Bears in week 1, but I think throughout the season, Stafford's going to step into that role as a top-tier fantasy football quarterback very nicely.
Last year, you were really high. You were really high on Daniel Jones early. Matter of fact, I remember you saying like second, third week, get Eli Manning out of there and get Daniel Jones in.
Well, thanks for pointing that out. And I think that, he's got a good cast around him, especially, Saquon Barkley. Everybody can see the talent he's got. Hopefully he won't get injured as much this year as he did last year. He's an incredible weapon, both running the ball and receiving out of the backfield. I think Daniel Jones just has that look of somebody that is going to play this game at a high level for a long time. And it started out of the gate. And I think it's only going to get better for him, not worse. And, he not only, as you pointed out, not only did he replace a quarterback, he replaced a Manning quarterback who's already won a couple of Super Bowls. So it wasn't like Daniel Jones just had it all handed to him coming out of the gate. He earned it. And so I think that's what we're going to see more of this year. One guy I think that's going to take, not a step backward. I don't think he's going to have the rebound year a lot of people are anticipating, and that's Baker Mayfield. I didn't think he was worthy of the number 1 overall pick coming out of Oklahoma in, 2 years ago that the Browns made him that choice. He does have a lot of weapons, just as he did last year. He's going to have a new coaching staff, but I think he's still the same Baker Mayfield in that he tends to force some things when just the simple play might be there, maybe a play that the receiver is short of the first down, but throw it to him anyway, see if he can make yards after the catch, and if not, punt the ball. That's something Baker Mayfield really did not have a lot of patience to do last year, possibly thinking he needs to live up to the billing of, this number 1 pick status that he has and will always have. But I think that I don't see out of him the consistency it's going to take to be that guy that every week throughout a football and 16-game season and beyond is going to be that productive. Another one I think that's going to fall short a little bit of people's expectations, is Gardner Minshew. Yes, he did replace Nick Foles because Nick Foles hurt his shoulder. And Gardner Minshew certainly is capable of showing flashes at times. He's an excellent athlete that can improvise. But I think the consistency comes week in and week out through this league of being able to make great, consistent decisions. And sometimes that great decision is to not fit a ball into tight coverage. It's to throw it over the receiver's head and maybe out of bounds and punt. But the Jaguars, I think, if you look around everybody's opinion coming into the season, the general consensus is they're going to be in line and probably the lead in that line of getting Trevor Lawrence with the number 1 overall pick coming out of Clemson this year. So I think Gardner Minshew might be playing, feeling he needs to prove himself as to what might happen next year with the draft. And I think that might add to some of the pressure he feels and again, the downturn he makes next year. Another name I'll throw out there is Rob Gronkowski. And I was excited to see, thinking maybe he might come back halfway through the season next year.
Yeah, I remember that every week you did.
That didn't happen, obviously. But now he's teamed up with Tom Brady down in Tampa Bay. And I think everybody's excited about all of the weapons that Brady's now going to have that he didn't have for a decade plus in New England, and Gronkowski being one of them. I just think that with a new surrounding city of Tampa Bay with a new playbook, with new weapons around him that he still has to form a consistent chemistry with all of them as well. And I think Gronkowski, for the reasons he went into retirement, which he felt beat up, I don't think he's going to feel less beat up just because he took a year off. I think he's still going to be that same guy. He's going to have flashes of great plays, followed by, plays or game, the rest of that game, and then games beyond where he doesn't show up with, large fantasy statistical numbers. One guy I think also that could have a breakout year this year as a rookie, which a lot of them don't, many don't, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire with Kansas City Chiefs. And we all know about what a great play caller Andy Reid is. We all know about how they probably have the best quarterback I've ever seen, at least after Joe Montana, in Patrick Mahomes, and just ridiculous amount of weapons around. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is stepping into the running back position where there's nobody to compete with. It's going to be his job from day one. And he's a fantastic, versatile running back who's just as good receiving out of the backfield as he is running the football. And I just think that's going to be a great pairing there with Patrick Mahomes and the rest of that offense. Another guy you were high on last year with the Seahawks is DK Metcalf. I
love DK Metcalf.
Right? Probably the best, I think, receiver talent-wise that Russell Wilson has ever had to throw to. And it seems like average or what are thought to be less than maybe top-tier receivers always end up having a great year with Russell Wilson. And so, you think back to Golden Tate and some of the other receivers, Doug Baldwin, that have had, would they have had great careers or great seasons on other teams? I don't know. But I think DK Metcalf fits the bill for a traditionally fantastic looking prospect and had some great moments last year that I think are going to build on into the future, starting with this one. Another guy that I'll mention too, and going back to the Kansas City Chiefs, is Mecole Hardman. And everybody knows that team is loaded with not just talent, but speed at every position. And I don't care if we're talking about tight end or Tyreek Hill at receiver, but Mecole Hardman's one of the fastest people on the Chiefs, which means he's one of the fastest players in the league. And I think he's going to become more of a consistent threat down the field. Remember, he's got a quarterback that's accurate up to maybe 70, 75 yards. So if you can get back, which Mecole Hardman has no problem getting deep and being fast down the field, I think they're going to find more ways to make him a consistent part of this offense and a big threat as well. The last one I'll mention here is Jonnu Smith, and that's the tight end down in Tennessee who everybody knows about the breakout year, I guess, from a playoff standpoint that Derrick Henry had in the running game. But Jonnu Smith, I think, showed the NFL as a league, and certainly I noticed the production he had because he's a tight end. First of all, it looks like a receiver running routes. And yes, they are a run-heavy offense, but I think Jonnu Smith is going to give them that dimension down the middle of the field that play action is going to bring. Once you've got Derrick Henry in that running game, Jonnu Smith is going to be the recipient of the production of down the field throws that offense and the running game bring.
Well, I'm glad to hear you point that out because my wife drafted Jonnu Smith last year, and she asked me if she should keep him this year, and I said yes. And so you're going to make me look good this year. Well, let's get to the game to the key players. We're going to skip Texans and Chiefs on Thursday night because we've already talked about Patrick Mahomes and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But the Sunday games, we're starting off with something really unusual. The Eagles at the Washington football team, the artist formerly known as the Redskins. They don't have a team name yet. Carson Wentz trying to prove he's for real again against a lackluster and hapless Washington team, which doesn't even know what their own name is. So I look for Wentz to really light it up.
I would say so too. And you mentioned how Carson Wentz is trying to prove he's the real thing. I think around the league, they look at Carson Wentz as the real thing. I don't really think he has anything to prove. If you think back to last year, given all the injuries the receivers and running backs went through, and yet because of Wentz, in large part, they won that division. So I think the Washington football team, starting with just the name itself that's been a source of disrespect, I would say, around the country outside of the NFL. Then you've got what's going on with Daniel Snyder and that front office, and the bad publicity that culture around that team has brought. I think that the Eagles, even though they're playing on the road this week, I like them. You've got, I think they're a healthy receiving core now, and I think that's what this team has been needing, and is now they have. Combine that with a stellar defense still, and I think that's a recipe for the Eagles to win this game.
Packers and Vikings. So I got to ask you, is this the year we finally stop calling Aaron Rodgers a QB1? I mean, I think Kirk Cousins outplays him even without Stephon Diggs, and Dalvin Cook is solid. But I got to think about Rodgers. I mean, he's getting up there in age. He's got to. Does he have a better cast around him this year?
I would say that the Packers, quietly, I guess, have built a fantastic defense. I mean, they're really good. They've come to rely on and establish a very good running game. They've got Devontae Adams outside, and beyond him, Jimmy Graham now plays for the Bears. And
Jimmy Graham is not the old Jimmy Graham.
He's not no longer a Packer. But I'm saying that the weapons, receiving wise, that the Packers once had, I don't think are there. And Rodgers, as you mentioned, he's getting a little bit older now, and I think their winning formula, they ended up in the NFC Championship game last year, not because of Aaron Rodgers playing, putting up fantastic numbers to the, latter part of the year last year. In fact, it was just the opposite. There was really no great fantasy football numbers out of Aaron Rodgers late in the year. So I think you're onto something there. I think the Packers, they're on the road against Minnesota. I think that's an offense that Kirk Cousins has grown into and become a key figure and a part of. Even without Stephon Diggs, I think they do enough good things offensively and defensively to win that game.
Colts and Jaguars, to me, the only interesting thing here is Phillip Rivers. And I think against the Jags, we see the start of good things for Rivers. Maybe he only has a year left, maybe two. I mean, his competitiveness has just got to keep him up there. He's got to show that. And I like him as a fantasy player.
I like him as a former NC State quarterback. I wouldn't say I would like him as a fantasy player because I think they're going to, Frank Reich, the head coach, is a smart guy and is someone that when I was playing, he was the backup in Buffalo for many years. And I think he's found the formula for the Colts as they've got an exceptional defense. They're building a solid running game. I think Phillip Rivers at this point in his career is really a guy that's going to come in and maybe get them the 2 or 3 extra wins that they didn't get last year because there was so much upheaval at their quarterback spot.
Bears and Lions. Lions are really loaded up this year. I think some good young players. They have a year under their belt. I like Matt Stafford, as you mentioned earlier. Hawkinson, I'm sold on. And I really am sold on DeAndre Swift, the new running back for them, even though, he's probably not going to be number one, at least not to start, because you've got, some really good starting running back ahead of him. But the Bears, I don't know what to say about the Bears. The Bears are the defense.
I do. Go ahead.
I know you do, and I'm going to let you. I'm going to get a word here. The thing about the Bears is, they had that great defensive last year, and it didn't happen from the beginning. They had a lot of problems all year. They still, they were, I don't know.
Well,
You tell me.
I'll just say this. If you think back to their opening game last year, was that a Monday night game against the Packers or Sunday night?
No, it was a Thursday night, right?
Thursday night. Okay.
We were there because we were there at the restaurant together at that game.
Okay. Well, they, if you think back to the game that was just completely dominated by the Bears defense and Khalil Mack in particular, who had not even he had one practice maybe before that game, and yet the Bears still lost because offensively they were so bad, and I don't see that changing this year. I think the Lions, as you mentioned, I think they're going to be improved not only offensively but defensively too, because that's where Matt Patricia. That's the whole reason he came in, is because he had that reputation working with Belichick all those years. So I think the Lions are going to They're not going to beat themselves. This is a game the Bears are going to have to win. It's going to be played in Detroit. I don't think the Bears, given the fact there's been no preseason games, there's been no offseason to speak of. They've had 3 weeks of training camp. I don't think offensively the Bears are coming into this game kind of on, sort of the obvious uptick. They've had some injuries in the backfield, and they didn't have a great running game last year. So I think this game, if I have to give it to anybody before the game as, okay, this team's going to win, this team's going to lose, I'd say the Lions are going to win this game.
I have to touch on the Browns-Ravens only because, how can you overlook Lamar Jackson? You have to start him, obviously. If you have any Ravens running backs, I think they're at least a flex play. And I'm definitely not sold on Beckham, but how do you not start Beckham if you have him on your team?
Okay, well, I never would have drafted Beckham because of his quarterback. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I don't think Baker Mayfield's the guy in Cleveland. And if any receivers establish himself with Baker Mayfield, it's been Jarvis Landry. And so I don't think, that's going to change in the near future. And I think, the Ravens, Lamar Jackson, everybody can see what a phenomenal year he had last year and how he kept improving and his game kept evolving throughout the year. The one, I'd say, game that stood out as where he didn't come through was in the playoff loss.
Right.
But I think, that's the kind of thing that will fuel a Lamar Jackson to get better. That's all I've heard about all offseason, is that he didn't really want to talk or care to talk about him winning the MVP. He was more focused on, I didn't play well enough in that last game to get us to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. So I think, that's what the Ravens are all about as a team, and Lamar Jackson in particular. And that's why this, to me, is an obvious win for the Ravens.
Cardinals at the 49ers, I think only the 49ers defense is a real fantasy play here. Although I think you have to look at Matt Breida if you have him at least as a flex play. I do like George Kittle and Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, Kittle is a starter if you have him. Garoppolo, I'm not so sure, depending on who you got in front of him. But I think Breida is at least a flex if even in deeper leagues.
Well, the guy I'd like to focus on in this game is George Kittle. And obviously, we've got a lot of highly drafted former Iowa Hawkeye tight ends, Kittle being, I think, the cream of that crop. And I think, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, Kittle's going to perform. He's going to block the edge on all running plays. He's going to be their threat down the field on play action passes. You can't cover him one-on-one. I don't care who's on him. And he's kind of the emotional leader of that team. And I think the Cardinals don't have an answer for that. I know, yes, they are better defensively than I think a lot of people thought they would be, at least last year. I think this has the potential, I think, to be a competitive game, at least for the first maybe half to 3 quarters. But I think the 49ers and that running game and that defense, that's where the 49ers are going to win this game. Garoppolo, I think, is not going to hurt them at quarterback. And I think he's developed into that role of a quarterback that plays mistake-free for the most part, doesn't hurt his team. But at the same time, Kyle Shanahan is not going to give him the reins to lose the game. And I think that's a role that Garoppolo is going to have to increasingly get better at and become, as efficient and maybe more efficient than he was last year, so that the game and the balance of games will be put in his hands more often.
The Bucs at the Saints, Tom Brady, of course, is only there. We're talking about this game because of Tom Brady and Drew Brees, of course.
Or the other guy, yeah.
Saints. Yeah. But, obviously those guys are plays. Tom Brady may not be a fantasy play if you've got somebody else out there because his numbers haven't been all that great. But Ronald Jones, I think, is a play, even though they've got guys like Fournette and the rookie that they drafted. But, Ronald Jones, I think, is at least a flex play, if nothing else. And if he's one of your top 2 running backs, I think you have to start him or look elsewhere, maybe in the pool.
Well, I think, you brought up a good point. And the reason we're even talking about this game at all is because of Tom Brady. And my personal feeling on how this season, statistically or fantasy football wise, how it's going to go for Brady, there's a lot of factors at play. First, he's got a new team in it, not just a new team, but a new city. He's been in New England for 20 years. He's got a new offense. He's got a new head coach who is the offensive coordinator, or at least in name, Byron Leftwich is, but I think the guy who sets this all up is Bruce Arians. And I think there's a lot of great players skill-wise around Tom Brady, including Rob Gronkowski, but I think it's going to take him some time to get comfortable within that system. And I think the latter, 3, 4, 5 years have not been great statistical years for Brady. He wins games and they go to Super Bowls, but it's not because of he's putting up 5,000 yards as a passer every year. Right. And I think, is he even the best quarterback on the field in this game?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think so. I think Drew Brees and that offense in New Orleans, that's a consistent year after year 5,000-yard a season passer, and at or approaching 40 touchdowns a year. And every year he seems to adapt to the game as it's evolved around him. He's never had a shortage of offensive weapons, right? And he's got a great caller in play caller in Sean Payton. So I think at the end of this game, who wins the game may be up in question, but who comes out of this game statistically better, I think that's going to be Drew Brees.
Cowboys at Rams, you got Dak and Zeke. They're up full place, as is the Cowboys' top draft pick. I really think wide receiver CeeDee Lamb is a play here, even though they've got other weapons. The Rams are a shot. Goff is a play. Any of their Ram wideouts are pretty much a play. So I think this, the defenses, are in the middle of the pack, I would think, don't you?
The talk, I guess, the Rams have a new defensive coordinator, but they still have an unbelievable cast of players on defense, and led by Aaron Donald, and who I think he's not just the best defensive player, but the best player in the NFL. And then on the other side, you've got the Cowboys who, they're talking about them being the Super Bowl contender because of their great offensive line, an exceptional defense, and Dak Prescott, who has done nothing but exceed expectations, maybe not his own. I think he's got great expectations for himself that may or may not be exceeded, but I don't think they are, because I think he wants a Super Bowl.
And no contract yet.
With no contract, but that hasn't stopped him from working hard to get there. So I think this is a game. It's played in LA. It's going to be at the new SoFi Stadium. There won't be any fans there, but I think the Rams are playing. If you think of Sean McVay, he took a lot of heat, not only for the Super Bowl loss, but for last season as a whole, which looked like the Rams regressed. And I think he's playing, or is coaching anyway, for the respectability that he earned early on as an unbelievable offensive coach and head coach that I think slipped a little bit last year. And I think he's playing or coaching to gain that respect back. So I think the Rams-Cowboys is going to be a great matchup. I think the Rams being at home, Goff, I think, is an excellent quarterback. But again, can he do it without Todd Gurley this year? And so there's a lot of, I think, players within the Rams organization that are going to have been looking towards this game as a way to start what they hope to be is going to be a Super Bowl run. So I got to give this game to the Rams.
You know where I'm going to be on Monday night. Steelers at Giants. They're playing in the Meadowlands. Daniel Jones, I don't think it's ready yet, but I'm in with you. I think by midseason he's going to be a top-notch quarterback. The only other thing I can recommend for the Giants, of course, obviously Saquon Barkley, and I really like Sterling Shepard. Now for the Steelers, defense, certain. They didn't lose anything on defense. They actually bolstered it. Javon is gone, but Hargrove, but they actually bolstered that defense. And the big question mark is, can Ben Roethlisberger come back and come back strong? He missed almost the entire season because of the elbow surgery. He's saying he's fine. The coaches are saying he's fine. You never know what's going on there. But I really do think he's ready. I think he's healthy. We'll see what happens. I'm betting he is, and I'm betting that improves what Juju Smith-Schuster does. And I also like James Conner, but as a flex at best. And I also like, but not early on, Chase Claypool, who's their top wide receiver pick. I really like this kid, very acrobatic. I think he's going to be an end zone target. Maybe not the first week, maybe the first week. I don't know, but I think he's going to be one of those guys who is just, the tall, athletic guy. You throw the ball up and hopefully he goes up against a defender and comes down with it in the end zone.
It's almost like this team.
Yeah,
even more
since I was born, I think.
Well, I think I guess along like you, I think Pittsburgh, their defense could just roll out every Sunday and be one of the top 1 or 2 defenses in the league. Which when I was playing, they were every year, and that's when Dick LeBeau was their defensive coordinator. And I think that it's going to be a tough go for the Giants this week, but I think Daniel Jones is going to prove himself, not in fantasy numbers, but in decision-making, accuracy, all the things that he's shown me he can do consistently. I think he'll play well. I just think the Steelers are going to win the game in part because of their defense, in part because of James Conner as well, and the versatility he brings and the toughness he brings that running game. But I think Ben Roethlisberger, everybody like you want to know, how's he going to do? How's the elbow going to hold up? Well, it's going to hold up like it always has. It's repaired. If there was any problem or complaint about it, we'd have heard about it by now. And I think he's going to be just fine. He's been durable his whole career. I think this beginning last year when he hurt himself and lost that season, I think the fact that they've not had an off season to be on the field, I think Ben Roethlisberger has used that to his advantage to rehab, to work out probably better and more often and more focused than he probably ever has, because he wants to answer those same questions that everybody is posing. Can he do it? Has he lost it? Does he have the same fire that he had when he won a couple of Super Bowls earlier in his career? And I think this is the fuel that he's going to need to come out and have not just a strong opening day, but throughout the season, I think you're going to see a renewed fire in Ben Roethlisberger.
I hope you're right, and I'm looking forward to it.
We'll
ESPN's look at it has the Steelers going 12-4, tied with the Ravens, but losing twice to the Ravens, and then losing in the first round of the playoffs. Hopefully they're wrong. They're right about one thing, and hopefully they're wrong about another. All right.
It's an awfully good year to lose in the first round of the playoffs.
That's well, as in Steeler country, we look at it this way: if we don't win the Super Bowl, the season was a lost season. That's just kind of the way it is in Pittsburgh. It always has been.
Mm-hmm.
There you have it. Another fantasy football week in the books. I'm Bob Brill. He's Erik Kramer. Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast, and now a video cast as well. You can hear the podcast on Libsyn, iTunes, Stitcher, radio.com, and wherever you get your podcasts. And now you can also see the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way. Join us next time. So long.